Welcome to Train Signal. You're watching a lesson on network tools. And in this lesson, I'll tell you what, this is going to be kind of a direct and to the point lesson where we're going to take a look at a number of the different tools that you would use if you are going to work on computer networks. Okay, as opposed to some of the tools that you might use, let's say to build a computer or repair a computer. These are tools that you would use to work on a network. The first tool I have listed here is something called a cable stripper. And this tool is used to strip off the outer insulation of a cable when you're getting ready to terminate it into a connector. So as an example, back in a previous lesson, I was talking about twisted pair cabling. I showed you a picture of what we see on the outside, right, which is just kind of that plastic outside insulation. And then I showed you a picture of how you have all these wires on the inside. And I mentioned how all these wires need to then get put into a jack, right, an RJ45 jack. Right? It's called terminating it into a connector. Well, a tool similar to the one I have on the screen, and this is just an example. They do come in different shapes and sizes, but in this one, you would put the cable into this tool and you would spin the tool around, and it has a blade in it and a hole that is designed to only cut that outer insulation but not touch the wires on the inside. That's how you get in there to go ahead and strip those wires and get them ready to be terminated. Now this next tool here is about as simplistic a tool as there is. It's called a snip. Snips are used to cut cables, period. Okay, so whereas the stripper only cuts the outer insulation, these flat out cut a cable, right? So you have a cable, maybe you have a spool of cable, right? You have 500 feet of cable, right, on a spool, but you need to make a 10-foot cable. Great, so you pull off 10 feet, or maybe you do a little more, right, in case you make a mistake. And then boom, use your snips, cut the cable. You know what snips are also sometimes called? Wire cutters. Okay, real simple. Snip, boom, cut the wire. Done. Now here's a very useful tool when it comes to networking, especially when working with cabling. It's something called a crimper. It's the crimper that is going to actually be used to attach the connector to the end of a cable. Now, this particular tool that I have illustrated on the screen happens to be more than just a crimper. Okay, so I just kind of wanted to mention that lots of times you will have multiple tools all in one tool. This particular one is used for all three that I've mentioned so far. Okay, in the sense that there is a section on this particular tool where you could feed a cable through and spin it around and only strip the outside insulation. There's a blade on this tool where you can go ahead and just cut a cable altogether. But then you'll also notice that there's a couple of holes where it looks like an RJ45 and an RJ11 jack could go. And the idea behind these tools is once you have a wire, or we'll say a cable that's been stripped and you have the wires bare and the wires have been put into the connector, you take those wires in the connector and you put them in this crimper and you squeeze it, and it crimps or pinches it all together so that it becomes permanent. And depending on the type of crimper you have, depending on how much money you were willing to spend and so on and so forth, some of them are easier to squeeze than others, right? Some of them kind of have the force. They help you with the force. Some of them, it's all about using, just your own pure, physical muscle to squeeze it. Some of them have an actual click that will tell you that you've basically squeezed far enough and your cable is, fully crimped, fully terminated. Others, you squeeze and you gauge it on your own. And you hope you squeezed hard enough before you let go. You find out the hard way if the connector falls off or not. Okay, so I just want you to understand that this is a very useful tool if you're going to be in networking. If you're going to ever terminate cables, this tool is going to be your best friend. And it is one that you might want to make a significant investment in so that you get the good one that helps you out. Here's a tool called the Punchdown Tool, and it's used to connect wire to something called a punch-down block. Now, we haven't talked about punch-down blocks in this course, and we're not going to. It has a lot to do with telephone wire. Okay, so again, we don't see as much of this as we used to, but when you have major telephone systems in a a large corporation, right? So you have this building and you have 500 people working in the building and they each have a phone on their desk, so each one has their own telephone line, their own telephone number. You have all these lines coming in. That's what all these wires are in the picture that I've got for you here. And this tool is used to punch those wires into something called a punch-down block. Okay, so it's this connector block where all these wires come together. Now here we have cable testers and cable certifiers. I don't have any picture for you here because the variety of shapes and sizes is way beyond me even giving you an example of one. I'm giving you examples where I can, but in some cases like this, there's just so many different shapes and sizes. It's all about the functionality. A cable tester is used to see whether a cable is working properly. Okay, so if I again take us back to the lesson where we talked about twisted pair cabling and I talked about the different wiring standards, the EIA, TIA, 568A and B, and you have the 8 wires and they're supposed to be all terminated into the jack, and if you want to see if data is actually transmitting appropriately across those wires, you can use cable tester to see if it's working properly. Whereas a certifier, it's a form of cable tester, but it's used to test and validate whether the cable is ready to handle certain levels of throughput. So it's not just generically functioning, it's functioning at a certain level and therefore can be, we'll say, certified to function at that level. Now here's a couple of tools. I'll be honest with you, they are not listed on the A+ objectives. I thought they kind of fit in with what we're talking about here as far as the cable checking and whatnot. We have something here called a time domain, and different people pronounce this last word differently. For the fun of it, I like to say reflectometer, but I think most people would say reflectometer, okay, or TDR. And then we have the optical version, right? It's an optical domain reflectometer, or I don't have it written there, but ODR. And the TDR is used to check the continuity of a copper cable, whereas the ODR is used to check the continuity of a fiber optic cable. The thing that's cool about these particular tools is that you can go ahead and connect them. If you're having a problem with a cable, you can actually connect them to one end of a cable. And maybe this cable runs behind a wall, or heck, it could just be running under a bunch of desks. And figuring out where the problem is not easy because it's hidden. You got to move stuff, tear down a wall. There's all sorts of different things. Well, these tools can help you locate where there is a break, or even if it's not a break, a malfunction in the cable. These tools are used to basically send a signal that is going to measure how long it takes before the signal bounces back, and based upon that, it will know, oh, all right, well, I sent the signal. I know this cable's no good anymore. We'll say it's broken, okay? We'll say it's full-on broken cable. And this cable's 100 feet long. I hook up this device, send the signal, and the signal comes back in the amount of time it would as though this was a 30-foot cable, not a 100-foot cable. You know what that tells me? It tells me that 30 feet down the way from the beginning of the cable, that's where the break happened. So now, I go measure 30 feet down, and let's use the example of, let's just say, I can remember in the day we had cables and they were running behind desks. Well, somebody had moved a desk, and when they put the desk back, this big heavy desk, and the desk had sharp corners and stuff, even on the legs, it actually cut a cable. Well, now I knew which desk to go check out. It said 30 feet out of the 100. Okay, great. Let's go 30 feet down. Let's pull this desk out. Look at that. The desk leg was on the cable and it snapped it. All right, now I know where my break is. And depending on the type of cable, I could either do a repair, I could do a new termination and maybe put a repeater type device in or something. Or if need be, I pull the whole cable and start over again, depending on my situation. But it's a great little tool to help you figure things out. Toner probe. Toner probe is used to locate the end of a cable. And it's made up of two different components. You have your tone generator and then the probe itself. And there's a couple of different useful things that can come out of the toner probe here. Now, first of all, one use is you can actually probe to see if there's still a signal behind a wall. So you can see, where the cable actually goes when it's hidden. But another thing that is very cool that you can use with the tone generator and the probe is if you have a scenario where you have a central, again, I don't want to get outside the scope here, something we haven't really talked about, but it's called a patch panel, where basically you have all these wires for all these networking cables all coming to one central location, right? One room. And then they all go into this one panel where you can then connect other things to them. And that's one end of the cables. The other end of the cable is all the various offices around your, all the different rooms and stuff in your office building. And maybe somebody didn't label very well. And you're trying to figure out, well, there's something plugged into this one port here in the server room, right? In this one central room where the patch panel is. And I'm not sure where that goes. Or more specifically, let's use a better scenario. You have a vacant office that you're going to put somebody in now. And you realize that the connection in the wall, right, where the cable comes to the wall in that office, is dead. It doesn't actually connect anything. And you want to connect it in to your hub or switch or router or whatever you're connecting it to in your central room, in your server room. Well, the problem is if it's not labeled, you don't know, in that room which cable it is. So it's a great way to help you to connect and send a signal across that cable, right? You plug into the one port in the office, and then you take the other device and you go into the server room and you start checking each port. Boom, 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 until you get a signal and go, oh, all right, so the tone's being generated across the line. You go to the other room until you find the answer. Here's something called a voltage event recorder. And it's used to monitor the quality, and I guess we could say quantity as well, of power coming from a wall outlet. Right? So if you've ever not been sure if you're having power issues that maybe you have a defective outlet in the wall, this is a great way to test it using a voltage event recorder. And then here we get to like the jack of all trades of tools. And it's called a multimeter. And it's funny that, we list this under networking tools. This is just an electrical tool as a whole. Okay? A multimeter is used to test a whole variety of information about cables, connectors, outlets. It can tell you all about electricity and how it's working or not working. You can check out your volts, your ohms, your amps. There's all sorts of different things you can check out. So you can check whether you have continuity. You can check how strong of a signal you have. You name it. As a matter of fact, this is an example of something where I probably should not have put a picture on the screen because, again, multimeters come in all different shapes and sizes. But I wanted to put a picture up there because at least this is somewhat what it primarily looks like. And finally, we have one last device here called the Loopback Plug, also sometimes called a Loopback adapter. And really all it is, it's a device that's plugged into a port, right? Some kind of a connection port on a computer in order to perform a loopback test, meaning basically you're checking out whether the port on the computer actually works, as opposed to whether you have connectivity out through the network or with other machines and things like that. Okay, so again, I did not give you a picture because depending on the port, the loopback plug is going to look different. So basically the idea is it's kind of a dummy plug that you plug into some kind of a networking port or communications port on a computer so that you can send a signal and then the signal will go out, but it doesn't go anywhere. It actually just loops right back into the computer so that the computer can say, oh, okay, the port's working, or no, the port's not working. So it's a way of testing a communication port to see if it works or not. And that does bring us to the end of this lesson where we saw, quite frankly, a list of tools that you would want to use if you are going to, as part of being a PC technician, if you're going to work on networks, you're going to want to have some of these tools handy. And again, remember, the multimeter, it's kind of the everything of everything. It can test all kinds of stuff. Another one I'll mention is that Crimper, especially if you're going to be terminating Ethernet cables. And again, that Crimper can also be, kind of a multi-device as well, in the sense that if you get the right one, you spend enough, you don't have to spend that much money, not that expensive, but you spend a decent amount of money, you can get one that also will cut wires, strip wires, and then also help gauge when there's enough pressure to truly crimp a wire. So these are some of the tools that you're going to want to be familiar with when working on networks. And I thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next lesson.